All right. Good morning, everyone. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to record the session, obviously. Because we're recording, please keep your mics muted. And then any questions you have, if you place them in the chat or jot them down if you're here in person. And then at the end of the presentation, what we do is shut off the recording so that everyone can feel free to, ask questions if they want to and not feel like they're being recorded. This session, I believe, is about an hour and maybe an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes. And then when we shut off the recording, we'll go live Q&A until noon. We do have the captioning turned on if you do need it. So with that, I will go ahead and start. For those of you who weren't at the last class, I'm Jen Barborak, and I'm the Executive Director of the Buhl Regional Health Foundation. In my previous role, I've been a grant writer for about 24 years, somewhere between 21, 24 years. I lost track. But I have a master's in grant writing, program evaluation. But as I said last week, that's not what qualifies me to teach anything about grant writing. Grant writing comes to you with experience. And so I feel, after my years of grant writing, plus now in my new role at the Buhl Regional Health Foundation, with the reviewing of grants, I have a little bit of both sides to be able to share with everyone. So you'll get a little bit of both sides from this presentation. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. And in the previous class, we spent a lot of time learning about our organization, organization types, different types of funders, how to find those funders, and then how to determine whether your program's a good match for that funder. And remember, that was one of the things that I said you'll hear until the day you die from me, is that you have to be a good match with your funder. So now let's get started on learning how to write the grant proposal. And what are some of the things that you might need to have for the grant proposal? And they're listed here. And everyone does get a copy of the slides. But the biggest thing is your mission statement. And remember, we talked last week about you can't be sure you're a match unless you have your clearly defined mission statement in front of you. And it should be brief. It should be a focused statement of the reason that your organization is formed, like your overall purpose. And then the mission should be the overarching context in which all of the organization's operations and programs operate, and therefore why your programs exist. Remember, we said you have to tie your programs to your mission. Then you'll need to have your certificate of incorporation, which we talked a little bit about this, but this document spells out the organization's purpose. And this is not your 501c3 determination letter, by the way. This is your certificate of incorporation. And it's more like laying out how you fit in with the laws of your particular state. And they're filed with the State Department in which your organization is incorporated. I think probably most people on the call are from Pennsylvania. Once that document is filed, then the state issues you a receipt confirming that that organization has legally come into existence. Some funders require this certificate or certification to be submitted with the proposal. I don't think Buhl Regional Health Foundation does. We have an ability to look that up, but some of the smaller funders might require that to be sent along. And then we did talk about the 501c3 determination letter. And I can tell you from my grant writing experience, any grant writer or any grant funder that I wrote a grant for required that 501 to be submitted with a proposal. The only time that it wasn't required was if I was a repeat grantee and they already had that certificate on file, but they usually do have a question that says, has anything happened to that status, in the meantime? I do want to reiterate that it is important to know what that document is. So if you don't know, and you think you have it, but you're not sure, and you'd like to, just double check and make sure you're sending the right thing along, call your funder and say, hey, look, this is the paper I'm looking at. Is this what you need? Some organizations will require a DUNS number. And DUNS is Data Universal Numbering System. Buhl Regional Health Foundation doesn't require this, but where you might get into this is with federal grants, sometimes state grants. And it's a proprietary system that's developed and managed by a company called Dun & Bradstreet. And they assign you a 9-digit numeric identifier that they call the DUNS number. And each individual business entity has an individual number. And to find that, you go to the Dun, it's DUNN, and Bradstreet website, and then you search for your organization, that's dnb.com. If you don't find your organization, then you can request for them to review your organization and assign you a number. Like I said, federal grants, I think they almost always require the DUNS number, and it is starting to become something that's increasingly more requested by other government entities, such like if you're applying for CDBG funding through your city or your county, that sometimes they'll require a DUNS number. Another thing that you'll want to have is a list of board members, and this isn't just a list of the names of your board members. I did that one time, and the grantor emailed me back and said, we wanted a little bit more information about your board members, so don't make that mistake. Every organization that is established has to have a list of board of directors that are responsible. And it could be, sometimes you have an organization where you have a president, and the president serves also as the secretary or the treasurer. You might have a vice president that also serves. Usually there's 3. But you want to make sure that you include not just the name of your board member, but their place of employment or their occupation. Some funders will even go so far as to ask about their race or ethnicity. They'll ask about their gender or how they identify, disabilities, organizational affiliations. And you'll find that with funders that are, for instance, a funder that is looking to fund an organization that serves individuals who have maybe a physical disability. And they will want to see that somebody on your board matches your constituents, in such a way that they have a physical disability and they require, the different equipment maybe that you're providing or something along that lines. I remember this, when I was with the medical equipment recycling program, and that is why we diversified our board the way we did, was because the funders were starting to look at what does your organization do, who does it serve, and are any of those people on your board to help you guide, help guide you in your decision making. Some funders actually require a record of board contributions. And they like to see that 100% of your board is either making a financial contribution or donating their expertise, such as an accountant or an attorney. And so you might end up needing to show not just your board of directors' names and occupations, but how many hours they either spend with the organization or what their financial contribution is each year. So if you have any questions about that, make sure you ask the funder exactly what they want to see. Most funders will require job descriptions for key staff members. Buhl Regional Health Foundation does not, but your job description should include the specification of the responsibilities of that particular staff position, not necessarily a person's name. But, if you have a director of, grants, somebody who's managing your grants, that position, you would want to have that job description ready. Some organizations will go so far as to want resumes of your key staff members as well. I think I have that further down. They also want to see employees and volunteers. They want to see how many volunteers you have, how many hours they spend volunteering with the program. Some will require you to break down your employees by full-time and part-time, percent of time spent with each different program. So it can get, a little sketchy in there sometimes with what they're asking for. And then an organizational chart. Many times the funder will want to see something in diagram form that shows maybe the structure and the internal lines of responsibility. So you have your key leader, and then, literally a drawing of lines coming down, and then this person is in charge of this program, and then lines coming down from there showing, who the individuals are working under them. So if they ask for a chart, usually they truly want an actual chart. And then larger organizations might also want you to maintain an organization chart for each program under under the umbrella of the larger ones. So for instance, when I ran the medical equipment recycling program at the UPMC Foundation, UPMC Foundation had an organizational chart. We had a board of directors, we had an executive director, I was the grant writer, but then under me were also programs. We had an AED program, we had a medical equipment recycling program, a healthy habits program, and each of those programs had an organizational chart of who was in charge of them, who the staff were that were assigned to those programs, how many hours each of those staff members applied to that particular program. And a lot of the larger funders will want to see that. The budget, we're going to talk a lot about budgeting, so I'm not going to go into that right here. But the budget is simply the fiscal plan for the entire organization. And then also they're going to want to see a specific program budget that is going to include an itemized list of anticipated income or revenues, and then the expenses that are going along with the program. And it should be developed every year. Don't get caught up in just submitting the same budget year after year. And for grant proposals, you want that to reflect as closely as possible the activities and the staff that you're describing in the grant, which is why we said it's so important to have your mission, and then how your programs meet your mission, and then how your staff are meeting those individual programs. Sometimes an audit is required, and an audit is a detailed financial analysis that's performed by an independent accountant at the end of the organization's fiscal year. Some funders might require an audit of your grant, and that would only be if it's a substantial amount. Like if you're receiving a $2 million grant or $1 million grant, the funder might actually say, look, you've got to pay for an audit to make sure that that money was spent appropriately. For grassroots organizations, a lot of times it's not financially feasible to spend $700, $800, $900, $1,000 on an audit. If you have like a $40,000 budget or a $50,000 budget, and you're fundraising, with little fundraisers trying to meet the needs of the organization, to try and take $1,000 of that and do an audit can be, not really in the best interest of the use of funds for the organization. And so what I've always recommended is that the smaller organizations develop yourself an audit committee. And it could be a, maybe a finance person or even an attorney. I know on the River Watchers, we had an audit committee that had a Hermitage policeman on it, and a finance guy, and the county controller, and just a group of volunteers. Give them your books, and make sure that committee includes people from outside your organization to give it more credibility. And what we would do is we would pass the books from one to the next to the next. And they would go through, they would make sure the numbers tied. They would sign the bottom of each page. So, you would have maybe 5 signatures at the bottom of each page. And that was what we would present to a funder when they asked for an audit. Many funders understand that you can't afford, to do an audit, but to simply say, oh, we don't have the money to do an audit, so we're not doing one is not enough for a lot of funders. They want to see that you have somebody outside the organization working with your key people in the organization who handle the money to ensure that everything is being handled appropriately. Sometimes larger funders will not only want an audit of the grant, but they'll want an audit of the whole organization too. So just keep in mind, the organizations that or the funders that you're applying to, look and see what their guidelines are. And if you're an organization that's not going to be able to take the time or the money and put it into, a couple $1,000 audit, don't apply for the grant. Because they are, if they want it, that's what they want. And then the next thing would be an annual report. And that is only if you publish one. And an annual report is a report issued by your organization that provides just a description of the activities during the year. There's usually some sort of reporting related to income and expenses or a current financial status. And for funders, the annual report of the organization that's seeking funding from them provides them with a lot of information that indicates that the organization is not just sound, but is receiving funding from different sources and that the funding is being spent appropriately. A lot of funders like to see diversification in where you're getting your funding from. They don't want to be the sole funder. So it also is going to show a funder how much of the funding that is being received from different organizations is being allotted to different programs. And so funders will look at that and say, oh, okay, they're applying to us for a medical equipment program. They have 6 other funders that they, consistently are getting money from. And, it looks like, sometimes they have a shortfall. We would love to be the ones supporting that or, a different program. For grantees, though, a peek at a potential funder's annual report is going to give you a clearer understanding of how your project is going to fit into their funding. If you don't publish an annual report, it's not a bad idea to just go ahead and maybe call it an annual newsletter. What I did at the medical equipment recycling program was a sheet of paper front and back. And it simply was a story, overcap or a recap of the year's numbers, how many bath chairs we gave out, how many individuals received equipment, how many returned that equipment. And then on the back side, it had pie charts. And it was simply money received by grants, money received by private donations, money received by fundraisers. And then the bottom chart was money going out to different equipment providers to do repairs, money that was going out specifically to purchase parts, purchase equipment. And so it was very simple breakdown. I didn't even put numbers with it. I literally had percentages. And a lot of times that's all a funder asked for. If they wanted something further and I didn't have the staff to put something together, then I didn't apply to them. Many funders will also want to see a current list and a potential list of other funders contributing for the program. And I know Buhl likes to see that there are other funders asking, that you're asking for funding from, and they like to see, we want to see that we're not the only ones. You're not putting all your eggs in one basket with one funder. And then show past support, usually going back at least 1 year, but sometimes 2. And it can be a list or a simple spreadsheet of, here's the different funders that we received funding from. We did a fundraiser and we got this amount from it. And then if you're seeking funding for a particular project from multiple funders, make sure you specify that, because your funder will want to know whether or not you received the money from those other funders to make up the total part of the project. Then you're going to want a history of your organization. I think we talked about that the first class, but maybe just a paragraph or 2. When the organization started, how it started. If there's like a really cool story behind why your organization started. Make sure it's in there. Don't make this boilerplate. Make it exciting. And then once this is written and is exciting and readable, then this piece is usually something that could be cut and pasted into different grant applications. So, you can use it for multiple applications. And the way I used to set up, I don't know if this is helpful to anyone, but I used to have different folders on my desktop. And I had a folder that was parts of a grant application that pretty much stay the same from year to year, which would be your history. It would be, maybe some sort of a story that you use, to kind of benefit or support, different parts of your grant application. There were like maybe 6 or 7 things that I would keep in that folder. And then as I was filling out grant applications, I would just cut and paste, into my grant application. And then make sure that, if you're receiving different parts from other people writing that, parts for you, that language all sounds the same. That when you go through, if you're the primary writer of that, it needs to sound like you the whole way through. It can't sound like you and then, oh, obviously somebody else wrote this piece and somebody else wrote that piece. You want it all to sound like one person wrote it. Another thing that they will ask for is current programs. And they're going to want about a paragraph or 2 about each program, even if it's not a program that you're writing to them for. This helps to add credibility to your organization, especially if you have programs that have been running for a long period of time and have been sustainable. It does add credibility to your application. And then I used to keep in that folder of, kind of boilerplate type of text, just recent news articles. And this should not be, if you're applying for a grant today, 2022, this should not be a news article from, like 2010. Like, you want these to be something that was in the paper within maybe the past year. And unless there is a really, really excellent article that was written about the startup of a great program or the startup of this program, and this program is 5 years old and you're trying to lend credibility to it, that's a different story. But usually you want those news articles to be recent. Any awards that you've received, we received awards. I believe we got an award from the Urban League one time, and it was a really nice dinner, and we went there and we got a certificate. I scanned that certificate in, and that certificate went along with some of my grant applications and, lended credibility to my organization. Letters of support, that's something that is really funder specific. Buhl Regional Health Foundation does not ask for letters of support, but I know I applied for, it was an organization out in Washington, D.C., and they wanted 3 letters of support. This is a letter from an individual or an agency in your community that either you're working with, you're collaborating with, or you're providing support to them or their clients, or they help provide support to your clients. And so I consider it a reference. And it includes a broad and general statement of knowledge and support for the organization and the programs. And it can be broad because you're going to want to use this. This also goes in your boilerplate folder. You're going to want to use this for different grant applications. So you don't want it written specifically to a particular funder. Instead of letters of support now, sometimes funders are asking for a linkage letter or a collaboration letter, a letter of commitment, sometimes a memorandum of understanding from a particular organization that is maybe partnering with you. A linkage letter, and this is something newer that has just started to come about, and it's a term that's used to describe a relationship between and among organizations working together within the community. And linkages are routine and ongoing rather than something that is project oriented. So for instance, a school that is providing space and security for an after-school program that is run by a nonprofit organization that is not part of the school. That would be a linkage. Partners might refer clients to each other. So the school might refer students, but the organization might also be referring individuals to different things that are going on in the school. And the staff from one agency at one particular organization might be providing services that aren't offered at that site, or offering training to staff or partner organizations. So that's what a linkage is. For grants that require a collaboration or a linkage letter, make sure that you spell that out in detail. They want to know, what is the link? So yes, we are using a space for this program. The space is free, or the space is maybe $1, but this is the linkage. A letter of commitment or a memorandum of understanding is a letter that is signed by an authorized representative of each organization and from each partner in a collaborative project that really specifically specifies the activities and service that each partner is contributing to that project. So for instance, you have, and I'm just trying to think of something like an after-school program, but that after-school program is collaborating with maybe a partnership with an organization that provides assistance to young moms. It's also working with an organization that does cleanup days and takes the students out into the neighborhoods doing cleanup days. Those are collaborations. So this after-school program maybe does 5 different activities every week, and they have 5 or 10 different partners or collaborating organizations that are working with them to make these happen. Those are collaborations. And I can tell you that a lot of funders want to see collaborations now. And I know it's very important to Buhl Regional Health Foundation to see collaborations. And then there's a, I forget what MOU stands for, and it's something that's brand new, but it is like an agreement that has to be reviewed by an attorney. And it's something I've never had to deal with, but if your funder requires an MOU, then you need to really get with your funder and ask them, hey, what is this? It's something new that I don't know much about, but make sure that if it's something that is very specific regarding legal things that you have to do as part of a program, that you have an attorney, either somebody on your board or somebody that you pay to review things like that.
Deanna said it's called a memorandum of understanding.
There you go, memorandum of understanding. Thank you. And if you don't have your letters on hand, make sure that you have at very least a list of people who would write a letter for you. Don't call them on Monday and say, I need a letter by Wednesday. Make sure you give them plenty of time so that they can write a nice letter for you, and then keep those letters on file. I used to go at the beginning of every year, go back to the individuals that wrote me letters of support for each program and ask them to renew their letter of support for me with a new date. We had one time at UPMC Foundation, a grantee applied to us, and they had a letter of support from an organization that we knew very well, and it was signed by an executive director that was no longer at that organization and hadn't been there for 2 years. So that doesn't look good in the funder's eyes. Make sure you update it. Make sure that if you know that someone who has given you a letter of support leaves the organization, that you go back to that organization, get a renewed letter of support with a new signature on it. You want those letters to be up to date. And like I said, they don't have to be personalized. for most of the grant applications. Now, some of these other like letters of commitment and memorandums, they do need to be updated and specific to the grant application, but your letters of support can be general. Not all funders are going to require all of these items that are listed here on this screen, but it's always good to have all of them on hand so that when you are pulling together a grant application quickly, you can go into your folder and pull these things as you need them. So then the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about grant writers as a consultant. And this is a whole different beast. I've done grant writing as a consultant, actually for organizations in Pittsburgh, which is very difficult because I had never, I think I've written maybe 5 or 6 grants for organizations in Pittsburgh, and I had never been to any of them. So it was all done over the phone. This was back before we had Zoom. We didn't have FaceTime or things like that. It was literally phone calls working, with these individuals. So keep in mind, there's many different people who can write the grant proposal. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a paid person within your organization. It could be the founder of your program, maybe someone no longer affiliated with the organization, but you're pulling in to write the grant. It could be an executive director, a board member, volunteers, or you can hire in a consultant. And if you in this class are looking to be that consultant that is writing grants for multiple organizations, I have some tips for you. And the first tip is to be very aware of the internal politics of the organization for which you're consulting. And this holds true if you're a grant writer for an organization that has multiple programs and you work for the organization. Make sure that you are aware of the inner workings and be prepared so that you can kind of vet the organization and determine who the major players are before you go into that first meeting. And that's really a big tip, because the first time I was a consultant and I went into the first meeting, I got run over like a train, had just barreled me over. So make sure you know who the major players are and make sure that you are in control of that meeting, and make sure that the upper management is supporting the grant proposal. And that is from experience. Does the upper management feel that their staff should be even assisting you with providing the information you need for the grant proposal? And I've had that problem as well, where the manager called me, I need this grant written, but then he wouldn't allow me access to the different staff members that I needed to pull the information together. Well, you can research that yourself. Well, why would I research that myself when your staff has it at their fingertips? So I charged them a lot more to write that grant because I had to do the research instead of, learning from their staff. Where did the idea for that proposal originate? That's very important. Did it originate from a volunteer? And the volunteer is calling you and all excited about this program, but the management don't know anything about it or the staff don't know anything about it? Was it a staff member who cares deeply about the program but doesn't really have much clout in the organization? And the people who you're going to need input from and information from know about it and have the time to provide the information to you? Is there a staff member at the organization who thinks he or she should be writing the grant instead of you? And that can be very difficult too. When you go in and you're kind of up against this person really needs to provide you the information, but they feel like this was their job or this was going to be their ability to advance. If you're sensitive to the inner workings of the organization, then it allows you to be more sensitive to the staff and then adapt your efforts accordingly. Beware of an organization where the management says it's the writer's job, assigns you to write the grant, and then says, sorry, you're on your own. Trust me. And then successful grant writers have to be savvy, and you have to get what you need from them, no matter how much that internal political environment gets in the way. The more savvy you are, the more successful you'll be. As a consultant, never procrastinate. Successful grant writers have to do a very clear and concise job, and you need to lay out a good timeline and make sure that you conduct yourself at a pace to meet all of the deadlines that you've set for yourself. And that means knowing who is getting you what information about different parts of the grant application and giving them deadlines so that they know when you have to have that. And Kimberly, who works for us here at the Buhl Regional Health Foundation, she's the director of grant making. She had a grant application that she used to have to fill out for an organization that we were a pass-through for funding. And she ran into this a couple of times where she would give them deadlines that were maybe 3 weeks ahead of when she needed the material, because she knew that it was sometimes difficult to get the material when she needed it. So make sure that you give yourself enough time. And then many times keep in mind, as a consultant, you are not going to have the luxury of writing multiple drafts, especially if you are billing on an hourly basis and the organization has set limitations. So writing well and writing quickly is key. And a quote that I used to keep on my bulletin board was, "Write meaty, not fluffy." Meat, M-E-A-T, full of meat, no fluff. Be organized, because you're the person who is requesting the information from multiple staff members. You're the one organizing the data, reviewing the budget information, making sure it makes sense, making sure it backs up what the program is asking for. You're pulling the documents together, you're organizing the meetings, and you're running the meetings. And that's very important. Make the telephone calls to the funder. That's all you. You're the one that is working with the collaborators, and you're working to write the clean and concise application for review by whoever has asked you to write the grant. And usually, and I'm just going to give you this tip, it was a one-time shot. I would write the grant, I would give it to the individual who had hired me, say, this is your ability to look through this application and determine whether or not I have done a good job. And if not, I need to know right now. And I made sure I had at least 2 weeks before that grant deadline was due, so that if they were late getting that back to me and I had to make a ton of changes, I wasn't up until 3 o'clock in the morning trying to make changes. So take it from me. And then you cannot be scattered. You have to really be organized. Try to be friendly. And I know sometimes it's hard, but being a consultant, you feel like you are enlisting the support that you need from staff members. If you go in feeling like you're a partner with them and you're friendly with them, it's going to make your life a lot easier. You need to have a lot of buy-in and active participation from your staff, not to mention you have to have a lot of information from the different participants in the process. So the most successful grant writers are going to kind of get into the heads of the program staff. It's your job to pick their brains and to start thinking like them. And then so you have to respect that they have their own very necessary jobs to do also. So that means if you schedule a meeting to glean information from them, make sure you have an agenda organized and that you stick to that agenda. You're not there to waste their time. Sometimes you kind of have to be a friendly stalker to get the information you need. You might have to make some phone calls to different staff to find out information that maybe someone else was supposed to provide you. And you might need to offer to go through records on your own. Okay, I understand you don't have time, send me the records and I'll look through it. And then you have to do that with a smile on your face, and you have to leave your baggage at home. And definitely as a grant writer, you can't be overly sensitive. You have to have thick skin. And you also need to know when it's time to make a call to the leadership if you're not getting the responses and information you need from the staff in a timely manner. My next tip is to be technologically savvy. You have to understand that you don't just need word processing skills. When you get into the nitty-gritty, grant writing is a lot more than just opening up a Word document. You have to know how to create financial spreadsheets. You have to understand how to create graphs and charts. You have to understand how to insert them into your document or online, an online document. You have to know how to crop photos, compile information for websites and social media or newsletters that you might have to create as the grant writer. And then you are probably going to need to understand grant portals, because most funders now are requiring the grants to be written online, and how to upload the documents to them, how to downsize your documents if your documents are too big. And then you might even need to conduct internet searches for data and research materials. So you have to be technologically savvy. And then focus on the big picture. Remember, you're the one that has to be able to look beyond a specific project to consider how it fits in with the bigger picture of not only the organization, but the funder, matching what the funder is looking for. Look at the grant opportunity in light of the organization's mission, vision, goals, sustainability, not just in the immediate need for funding, but keep the program going as long as it needs to go on. And how are you going to develop that sustainability? Be kind of the planner for the staff and for the organization, and be prepared to advocate for the funding request to include either more or less than what was originally asked. So you might find out the funder would support general operating, which would be huge. And then it might be better for you to recommend that avenue to your organization instead of writing for the project. So you might go back to the organization and say, look, hey, I found that diamond in the rough, the organization that is going to fund general operating. Let's switch around our strategy here. And that falls on the grant writer, whether you're the grant writer within the organization or a consultant. And keep in mind the long-term strategic plan of the organization, and ensure that the grants that you're writing for fit into their strategic plan. Definitely engage the decision makers at the organization. Make sure that your first meeting is with the leadership of the organization, and then determine from that meeting what is the upper level of support for this program. The leader of the organization is going to help you identify who the staff members and volunteers are who can help pull together the information that you need for the grant, and then lay out to them your proposal requirements, your needs for information, explore the project leader's goals for the grant, request any materials that are going to be needed at your initial meeting so that they know what they have to be out there getting, and then set a date for a kickoff meeting that's going to include the relevant people that are going to help you write the grant. Then also include who is supposed to invite the staff members and volunteers to participate, and not just who in general. Get a name, get a phone number, get an email, hold their feet to the fire, and don't let that drag out. Make sure you get off on the right foot with them. Your kickoff meeting has to be carefully planned, and you need to be prepared with a list of everything that you're going to need to write the grant. And so that means that you already need to know who the funder is that you're requesting money from. And keep in mind, you're the facilitator of this meeting. Don't get run over by the train. Don't be caught off guard. Plan extensively for it, because this might be the only time that you become face-to-face with each individual who is going to be providing input to you, or by Zoom or however. Like I said, make sure you have a specific agenda so that you're not wasting anyone's time, And here are some things that you want to include in your agenda. You have to know the proposal guidelines, include who the funder is. Let them know who you're requesting money from. What elements are allowed to be included in the proposal. And this is very important that the staff members know upfront what is allowed to be written for within that grant, and then what's not allowed. And then be intimately aware of your funder's guidelines and how your funding request is going to fit in with that before your meeting with the staff. Prepare for a discussion of the problem, and it should be brief. And this, what is the grant funded program going to address? How are you going to organize your grant application around that? And then what are the specific sections of the proposal that the funder is looking for? This can include a little bit of brainstorming, but if it's a larger group of people, you don't want to get into the brainstorming here. They should already have done the brainstorming. They should already know exactly what they're asking for. It's more for you to pull that information from them. Don't begin your meeting with, well, what do you want to do? Take it from me, because if you have 5 different people in the room, you're gonna have 5 different answers to that question. Instead, control the meeting with specific questions related to what you need to know about the ins and outs of the program. Ask about specific activities that are going to take place within the program, and be prepared to give everyone a detailed timeline and assignments of responsibilities with clear deadlines, and then focus on what the next steps are. Let them know exactly what materials you need. Determine any demographic data that you need to support your application. You should know this up front, and then make sure that you're assigning it to a person with an email and a phone number that is given to you. Make sure that you have specific commitments from people, and don't let anyone leave until they know what they are to provide you and what their due date is. And then have a sign-in sheet. Like I said, collect emails, phone numbers, so that you don't have to go back to the executive leadership all the time. I need to contact this person and I didn't get their email. Next, you need to know who the grant maker is. Well, obviously prior to this meeting, but it's important that you've done your research on the grant maker and reread their application prior to this meeting so that you have a good understanding of all the questions that they're asking and the order in which they're asking it. Don't be greedy. Never are you going to receive any indication from the grantor about how much is too much. So make sure that when you go into the meeting that you're not saying, okay, pie in the sky, sky's the limit, what do you want? That you're saying, okay, here's what you're telling me we're writing this grant for. What does it cost? Don't tell them what the funder, what the range is of the funder. You know that already. You've looked at the funder's 990. You know how this program might fit into their 990. Don't let them say, oh, well, if that funder, if they would give us 100,000, we could use it. You need to look at what the program is going to cost and only apply for what they're needing. And then make sure that the salaries and the other budget items are realistic and reasonable. And I got caught up in this with one of the grants that I was writing for an organization in Pittsburgh. They initially contacted me. They wanted to put together a driving school within a magnet school in Pittsburgh. And they were applying to American Eagle, for this elaborate, piece of driving equipment that would teach kids how to drive safely. But the salary for the person who was overseeing that program was excessive. And you could tell kind of from the beginning that it was more, we're trying to fund everything instead of just, here, we want this program. And so as the grant writer, I had to go in and say, look, this salary is excessive, and you've got to be honest with your organizations and be realistic. And I said, this this funder is not going to look at this favorably. You need to tell me how to cut some of these costs out of here because you're asking too much for different things. Definitely remember to ask the volunteers or the staff members within the organization for in-kind support items. In-kind is very, very important, and in-kind can come in many forms. It could be use of a meeting room, by, I know like at UPMC, at the Women Care Center, we used to allow different organizations in the community to use our meeting room, and then we used that as a community benefit, and maybe it was a $400 meeting room, and maybe a sleep apnea group used it 6 days out of the year. And that sleep apnea group, when they were looking for grants, because they called us and said, how much is that meeting room worth? Well, we usually would have rented it out for $400. And they put that in their grant application as an in-kind donation. And the funder looks on that favorably. Never embellish or lay out unrealistic plans within the proposal, because the funder is definitely going to recognize that immediately, especially when you have some people who are reviewing these grants who have written grants. And they know where the fluff is, they know where the added funding is. Most of your funders have people on their board reviewing your grant applications that have written grants themselves and have tried to pull some of these little things that you're going to try to pull. So just don't do that. Think about the reader and don't use abbreviations or jargon. And this is across the board. I always wrote at least or at most a 10th grade level. Very rarely, and I can think of maybe 2 research grants that I helped with at UPMC, where we wrote at a truly college, technical level. And we used jargon, but there's a place for that. And usually when you're writing a grant to a foundation, that's not the time to use your jargon. Write clearly and concisely, and then watch your language too. Be sensitive to the way that you're describing programs or constituents, and be careful not to use maybe outdated terms that have now become offensive. Make sure the organization has built a relationship with the funder, or if not, you're going to have to do this yourself as the grant writer, because that funder has to trust that organization. Make sure you're keeping up with the news related to the programs that you're writing grants for, because the best grant writers are smart and up to date on the issues for which they specialize in writing grants. So for instance, when I was writing grants for the medical equipment recycling program, I was up to date on not only on just the language, the language related to individuals who needed to use equipment, how you referred to them in your grant application changed 3 times over the course of maybe 10 years that I was writing grants for that program. When I was writing grants for Shenango River Watchers environmental organization, I was very up to date on what's going on in our state related to water quality, related to research that's going on with different organizations or organisms that live within a stream. What is a watershed? How is a watershed affecting our community? But being up to date on what you're specializing in is very important, because your funder is also up to date on what they are funding. So you need to make sure that you can match their level of expertise. Winning grant proposals are going to reflect the climate in which they're developed and written. So don't write your proposal in a vacuum. Take your time to read everything you can, because like I said, the funder is. And then stay organized. And I had always a file folder for each grant. There were many times, especially with UPMC, but when I was writing grants for UPMC Foundation, I was writing grants for AED program, Healthy Habits program, medical equipment recycling program. And then on the side, I was doing consulting work for, an organization in Pittsburgh for Shenango River Watchers. I was writing grants for the Beautification Commission. And so keep yourself organized. And what I would do is I was old school paper at that time. It's a lot easier now that everything is on a computer. I had a folder for each grant. And then within that folder, I had dividers. And the first divider included the first sheets that I gave you, the worksheets that I gave you. And like I said, I color coded them according to either the organization for which I was writing for, or if it was at UPMC, the programs. So I knew pink was MERP, I knew blue was AED, I knew yellow was Healthy Habits. And then I knew River Watchers stuff was blue, and I knew beautification stuff was orange, and I knew Pittsburgh stuff was, gold or black or whatever, like made sense to me. And then when I was looking at my files, I could very easily determine, what those, what organizations or what projects those items were for. And then what I did is I had file folders that corresponded to the color of the program. So I had, pink file folders for anything MERP related, and then the papers, that the worksheets that were in there were pink, so that I knew everything pink was related to that. And then at the beginning, I always had all the information about the funder. And then once I got the grant, if I was awarded the grant agreement went in there, and that I didn't print that on pink or anything. I just had it in there. And then right up front, the budget. And this is the budget that you have to stick to. So you have the agreement and the budget right at your fingertips. And then the next divider back was all correspondence related to the grant. And I kept it all in order. And I, being who I am, alphabetized it, according to who the organization was, so that if I needed any correspondence, related to, for instance, the Pittsburgh project, American Eagle correspondence, I knew that would be right at the beginning. Then the next divider was any reports, and that was progress reports, reports that were needed for your grant, but also reports that were submitted to me. For instance, the medical equipment recycling program gave me monthly reports. Here's how much, here's how much equipment we loaned. Here's how many, individuals we reached. And then I would take that report and put it, behind that report divider and lump it by quarter, because my reporting for a particular funder was quarterly based. And so then I knew I could just grab the first 3 reports, compile them, and put them into that quarterly report. Sometimes you'll have funders that want monthly reports, and I can tell you it's a pain in the butt. I had one organization that I wrote grants every year. It was through Temple University for the medical equipment recycling program. It was a $5,000 grant, drop in the bucket compared to what that program, was like a $200 and some thousand program, but it was money that we received every year. We knew every year we were going to get that $5,000 as long as I submitted a monthly report to them. And so those monthly reports, I made sure that, I had the data to support the report and the actual report itself in that folder. And then the fourth one is expenses, receipts, and other expenditures, anything. So for instance, with the medical equipment recycling program, we had maybe 7 grants that we were, administering at the same time. And it was my job to keep those straight and to make sure that our coordinator for the program provided that reporting to me according to what the funder needed. And so I would all the time call her, say, okay, with Buhl Regional Health Foundation, we're coming up on a 6-month here. We should have spent half the money. Where are the invoices to show that you have spent half the money? And oh my goodness, no, I haven't spent half yet. All right, you got to do it. Like, you got to do it right now, because I don't want to come up to a 6-month report and have invoices that are dated for, maybe it's March 31st, the report is due, the invoices are dated for March 1st. Like, you want to show that you're consistently using that funding in the way it's meant to be used throughout the period of time that you're supposed to be using it. So, as the grant writer, you have to keep in mind, you've got a lot of moving parts going on all the time. And that's why it's important to keep organized. And then I had it was a grant management software. It was free. I had pulled it off of the internet. And pretty much what it did was it was color coded too. And then I developed like a task management system where I knew for each grant, okay, here's my calendar for the year, and it was color coded, and I knew when each report was due. So get yourself organized, however you like to do it. But I always did it, just with the file folders and colors, obviously. So then on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the grant application, actually a lot about the grant application. And the first thing you have to do is make an outline. Before you write anything, create an outline that exactly follows the funder's guidelines, questions, criteria. And this is going to help you deal with brain fog and brain paralysis, which really is going to set in. And I'm telling you for sure it does. When you start looking at a blank page and you're like, I don't even know where to begin. So if you start out with an outline of, maybe the organization, asks specifically for your background statement, and then, your mission and your vision and, whatever they ask for. And then once you have that outline, then you can go into your folder of boilerplate stuff and start plucking what you need to go into that outline. Then you can start to look at the parts of the outline that need to be filled. And then follow the funder's outline to a T. So if the first question is, how are you going to evaluate that program, then put that question first. That doesn't mean you have to write it first, but make sure that your order is the order that they are asking for. And this actually is becoming a lot less important now because most of the funders are asking for everything online. And so back when I started grant writing, everything was paper. And so you had to make sure that you had everything lined up the way the funder wanted it. Use subheads for each topic within your outline. So take your outline and then maybe take 3 subheadings and put them there so that you don't start to kind of get lost. Sometimes it's easy when you're writing about a program that you know really well or you love really well to start just having a brain dump onto the paper and kind of getting lost with what you're truly answering. And so if you have your title and then some subheads, knowing what you need to put in there is going to help keep you in line. There's nothing worse as a funder to read a poorly organized proposal. And even the best writing, if it's not organized, seems incomprehensible. So you might not even use the subheads within your proposal, but for now it helps you to keep in line and jumpstart the process. Before you start filling in the outline, organize the pieces that you have. And then some information might be left out of some proposals, but it is good to start each time with everything that you need to keep you organized. So, keep the information about the organization on hand, information about the programs, the target population, census information, historical facts related to that topic, performance statistics related to the program, statistics related to constituents for which you're writing, newsletters, reports. Make sure that you have all of that organized and grouped together before you start writing. And then this is very important. Write as you should speak. Don't be overly formal, but don't be so casual that the funder is like, what the heck is going on here? A good book that I have or had that I used for for writing was called Elements of Style. And it was Strunk and White were the authors. And it was a writing style guide that we were kind of pointed to while we were doing the master's program. And it contains just 8 elementary rules of word uses, and then 10 elementary principles of composition, and then a list of 49 words and expressions that are commonly misused, because there's nothing worse than reading a grant application and seeing THERE instead of THEIR. And then it has 57 words that are often misspelled. And it actually has been named as one of the best and most influential books written. So I'm going to read to you 3 statements, and this is actually from that book. And I want you to listen to them and get a feel for what I'm talking about here. So the first one, the executive director of the Meridian Muse Center, the delightful Miss Jane Manning, is erudite, learned, and has never been known to bloviate, I don't even know how to pronounce that, when she addresses her comrades at worldwide conferences. A little bit pretentious. The second one, the executive director of the Meridian Muse Center, Jane Manning, is way cool and all the kids at the center think she's hot.
Oh my.
A little too, yes. Now listen to the third statement. In April of 2008, the executive director of the Meridian Muse Center, Jane Manning, was voted most popular executive director and one of the 50 most respected leaders of nonprofit organizations by the National Association of Children's Programming at their conference. And more than one teen at the center has called her way cool. That is specific. It backs up what you're trying to write about Jane Manning. And it doesn't include, the erudite, learned, it's more written at the level of which the reader would like to see it. Some grant makers might even feel that it's disrespectful for the writer to have written number 2. She's way cool and all the kids think she's hot. They might find that disrespectful, and they might not find that style of writing to be fundable, really. So that third statement, it's to the point. It sounds as though an adult wrote it, and it's more meaningful to the reader, that executive director won recognition. So the best strategy for your writing is to let the facts speak for themselves. And then double and triple think about your choice of words. Never fall back on slang or imprecise or insensitive terminology. Slang words don't belong in a grant proposal. Take care to describe precisely traits and attributes instead of slang. So a couple more to consider. Number 1, the cops think the Meridian Muse Center has helped kids in the hood stay out of the slammer. Way too slang. Definitely, in my mind, disrespectful to the funder. And number 2, this is even worse. Kids in the program are really messed up. Number 3, children between the ages of 7 and 10 who are from families with an income at or below federal poverty level guidelines participate in the activities at the Meridian Muse Center, providing a safe place for them to learn and excel. Now, how much more information do you glean from that? It says almost the same thing that the first 2 said, but you don't want to be insensitive or full of slang. And then definitely keeping on top of changing trends in the language. So for instance, it used to be okay to say the retarded. Now, and I have a very dear friend of mine who went to a program where he was considered retarded. And it's so much more sensitive now and appropriate and acceptable to say children with intellectual disabilities. It's hard to even let the first word roll off your tongue anymore. So be sensitive to what those trends are and make sure that you're putting that into your grant application. And don't exaggerate. This is the worst. You're not doing the most cutting edge, earth shattering program on the planet. Let the facts speak for the program that you're doing. So I have another, to compare statements. One, the Meridian Muse Center offers innovative and cutting edge basketball instruction to the kids in the program. That really says nothing. Number two, the Meridian Muse Centers offers basketball instruction to the children who participate. The instructor is a basketball coach at Meridian University who received a grant from the Basketball Institute to teach the art and science of basketball to children. The facts lend credibility to the program. But one more example. The Children's Center is located in the poorest section of America. How about instead saying the Children's Center is located in a metropolis neighborhood where 80% of the residents are on public assistance and 60% of the children under age 16 live in single parent homes. Or, using statistics to support, maybe it is the poorest section of in America, but how do you really know that? Instead, use your statistics to support that. Don't assume that the reader knows your area and knows the data from your region. Make sure that you provide them with that data. The next very good tip I have for you is to please buy a grammar book, a dictionary, and a thesaurus and use them. Nothing is worse for the funder to read for grammar. And I know we have spell check and we have different things through Word, but spell check doesn't pick up everything and grammar check doesn't pick up anything. Misspellings and inappropriate words, it suggests that you're either poorly educated or you don't care enough about the proposal to proofread. So ask a friend to proofread for you. No funder is going to give money to an organization that allows a proposal to go out the door with multiple errors, multiple poor grammatical sentences, multiple misspellings. What I used to do is read my sentences backwards. And whatever you need to do to make sure that the spelling is correct or the word usage is correct, but to read the sentence backwards makes you look at the word and look at the spelling of the word. And then one other thing I used to do, and I would highly recommend everyone in this class, pick a partner, someone from another organization, someone who's not anywhere near affiliated with what you're doing. Give them your grant application, ask them to read it, and then ask them to tell you what it said. Because if they can't tell you what it said and they don't know your program, then the funder doesn't know what it said. And there have been several times, I think I might have touched on this in the last class, where Buhl Regional Health Foundation, we're reading a grant and it's like, you get through it and you're like, I don't even know what they're asking for. I don't even know how this ties to their programming. So get yourself a buddy and start tossing things back and forth to each other. This is very important. Stick to active voice, and this is so hard to do. And I used to have another little sticky note on my computer screen that said active voice. So instead of students will be recruited, what you want to do is say outreach workers will recruit children. This is who is doing what. Instead of a director will be hired, the executive director will interview and hire a project director. It's much more clear and it keeps you honest, because if you don't know who is going to recruit the students, then you start to kind of cruise to that passive voice. Oh, the students will be recruited, but the funder is going to look at that and be like, yeah, but they don't know who's going to recruit the students yet. So Make sure that the way you're writing, you are letting the funder know you've got this, you're in control of it, you know exactly who is doing what. So a couple examples. Parenting workshops will be conducted for the parents of children who participate in the center's programs. Instead, nurse practitioners will conduct parent workshops for the parents of the children who participate in the program, active. Another one, a project director for the grant-funded program will be hired. Instead, you would say the executive director or the board will hire a project director for the program. Who is doing what? Make the writing concise. It lets the funder know that you've got your ducks in a row. Keep your judgments, your political views, and your sense of humor out of the proposal. Was something that you might find funny, or starting off a sentence with something that you think is funny might actually not be funny in the eyes of the funder. So a few examples. The center was created to counter the federal government's shocking lack of interest in children. That has a political connotation to it. I'd avoid that. The second one, the center staff think children should be seen and not heard, and punishes them for talking out of line. Well, that's kind of a controversial idea. Keep that out of your grant. The center is only good for the lads and lassies in the neighborhood, not for the little ones with problems of any kind. Oh, just kidding. This is the kind of joke that a beginner proposal writer might think would liven up the proposal, but it really doesn't. Keep your adjectives to a limit. When you have too many adjectives tacked onto a noun, then it leads the reader to believe that it's more of an opinion than a fact. So for instance, the Children's Center runs a high quality, exhilarating, well-regarded program for the poor, disadvantaged, disabled children in our neighborhood. Instead, the Children's Center runs 4 programs that have been cited for excellence by After School Society. Attendance is at over 90%. The children are, coming from a school district that has 100% free lunch program. There are ways that you can state facts in your sentence instead of trying to use adjectives to make it seem like it's better or it's excellent. And funders read through that. We call it fluff or opinion. So overusing adjectives can often also be seen as a shortcut on the side of the grant writer, because it relieves you from having to actually find the facts that are supporting the sentence. So make sure you don't fall into that. Now, adjectives can be effective if you can show why you've selected them. So for instance, the innovative program is the first in the city to link college athletes with children for basketball. You've said innovative, but it's the first in the city. You're backing that statement up. Otherwise, to use an adjective like innovative is really worthless, and it's annoying, and it's fluff. Limit first person usage, such as I, we, and our. And there are times when it's appropriate to use those words, but choose those times carefully. So instead of saying we're located, it would be the center is located. Instead of we will conduct, who is going to conduct? This is where you kind of get lazy. So the staff psychologists will conduct. Instead of our partners include, say the center's partners include. So try and stay away from those I, we, our. If you do use first person, be sure that it's not confusing to the reader. So for example, we will run workshops for our parents. Now the reader is going to stop and be like, okay, are they talking about the parents of the children in the community, the parents of the children in the program, parents of the staff? Like, so when you're using our or we or I, well, I is pretty, we or our, make sure that you're using it in the correct way. And anytime you're making a grant writer or a grant maker stop and think about what you're meaning, you have lost just a tad bit of momentum in what could be an excellent proposal. So don't get into fall down that rabbit hole. And then unless you're trying to confuse the reader, abbreviations and acronyms have no place in a grant proposal. If you're going to use an acronym, make sure that the first time you use it, you spell it out and then put the acronym in parentheses next to it. So for instance, when I was writing grants for the medical equipment recycling program, we called it MERP. But I always, the very first paragraph would say the medical equipment recycling program, and then in parentheses, MERP. That way the reader knows what MERP stands for. And, the only time where, it might be, appropriate to use acronyms would be if you're writing a state or a federal grant for a state or federal program that already uses those acronyms. And you know that the readers and reviewers of that grant application know what the acronyms are. If it were me, I would still list out what that acronym stands for. And then follow the guidelines. You don't want your proposal to be rejected because you didn't follow the rules. And we have done that. And we did that at UPMC Foundation too. If they say 6 pages, double spaced, single-sided, no binding, follow the instructions, because there is nothing worse as a grant funder to receive. You have 17 board members, you ask for 17 copies of a paper grant application, and you receive 17 copies that are bound. And what you're doing is taking certain pieces out of that proposal and giving them to certain different committee members, or people who maybe are not even on the board, or the board members are trying to disassemble that grant application to give parts of it to committee members that are reviewing pieces for them. I'll never forget one time we asked for 3 copies and we wanted them unbound, no staple, no nothing. And they came with plastic cover and the wire binding. And I had to sit there and disassemble, those 3 grant proposals and then pull out what I was looking for and scan it in. So just do what they ask you to do. Don't think, oh, well, I'm going to make this look nice by binding it, or, they didn't ask for this, but it's going to make it look special. It annoys us. It really does. And then obviously checking the fit. We've talked about this multiple times. So when you're conducting project research, you're going to come across many other opportunities presented by those grant makers or special pots of funding for specific programs, and they're all going to sound exciting and they're all going to sound worthwhile. But be sure that you're looking at funding opportunities in the context of your own mission. Is there a true natural fit, or are you trying to put a square peg in a round hole? Don't put the square peg in the round hole. Make sure the facts in your proposal are updated and relevant. If you're talking about, individuals who have, maybe a physical handicap, and you're using, it's 2022 and you're using census data from 2010, that doesn't make sense to the funder. Make sure that you're updating your facts. And the most important figures are the ones that are specific to your problem in your geographical area. It's very frustrating for funders to be reading a grant application that is referring to maybe data that doesn't really pertain to what you're writing about, or it's not the most recent data. Be very cautious about painting a bleak picture. Present a well-reasoned, thoughtful scenario, but don't make your problem seem so bleak that the funder sees no reason to even try to address the problem. And we have seen a lot of that, especially with UPMC Foundation. It was a woe is me. This is so huge of a problem and we can only attack a little wee piece of it. And that, you know, as the funder, you're like, "Ugh, why even attack the little wee piece of it because it's so big?" So don't paint that big bleak picture. Show what you're going to do to help alleviate a problem. Your executive summary and budget are also part of this, but the executive summary, even though it's the first thing that's going to be read by the funder, has to be the last thing that you write. And it should include all the important parts of the proposal, and it has to be telling. We can set our owl, maybe having a hard time. I don't know.
Yeah, and no one else is unmuted. so
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Keep it sweet and simple and avoid the jargon. We already talked about that. Don't overwrite. And if you're filling out a grant application online, you can't overwrite. Make your proposal easy for someone who's not an expert in the field, read it and understand it. And then, like I said, get feedback from someone else before you submit it. I used to take my proposals and ask my mom to read them and then have her tell me if she understood it. And like I said, it's best to have someone who has no knowledge about your program read it for you. One size does not fit all. After you develop a proposal, make sure you study the guidelines of the funder and tailor your proposal to match their guidelines and mission. And this is extremely important. Funders don't want boilerplate information. They might request the information that you've already collected in different formats. Make sure you're providing it to them in the format that they want. You're going to find yourself cutting and pasting and relabeling and rearranging. You've got to be technologically savvy. Make sure if you cut and paste and move sections around, that you reread it. And you're sure that it's flowing properly from one section to the next. The owl is easy.
Can you guys still hear us? Should be okay.
Are we good? Okay, all right. Where were we? Plan ahead. Each funder operates on his or her own schedule, and most grants operate within a 3 to 6 month window. So from the time a proposal is written and submitted to the time the funder might respond could potentially take between 3 to 6 months. So keep a calendar of your deadlines and include in that calendar their deadline, the date you sent the request, and the date they responded. And some funders are going to require you to wait 1 year, sometimes even 18 months before you apply again for the same project. So in the next slide, the initial approach. What time is it, Jess? How am I doing?
11:30.
Okay. If you have a phone number, make sure that you call and be prepared to discuss your project or program in length with the funder. And we talked about this in the first class. The letter of inquiry is some foundations, for them, this is the initial approach. So you're going to treat it as a mini proposal. It's 2 to 3 pages. You're simply going to explain to them why you're writing to them. In what way does your mission align with their mission? How does it fit into their overall interests? What is the need of the community you're addressing it, how you're going to address it, and how much that costs. Be sure you have an ask for a specific amount in your LOI for a specific project. Explain very specifically how that's going to be used. And then keep in mind that that LOI sometimes might actually also be, it can be a letter of inquiry, LOI, or a letter of intent, LOI. And this is a statement, a letter of intent is just simply that you're planning to apply for a grant. And this is oftentimes government funders, federal agencies. And this helps them to determine how long the review process is going to be, how many reviewers they need to hire. And so then they'll look at those letters of intent and then they'll pick and choose how many of them they're going to allow back based on how many reviewers they have. So I do have a worksheet that we'll hand out. You don't need to worry about putting it up, Jess. It's worksheet 2.1 and it's called a letter of inquiry questionnaire. If you fill out that worksheet before you write your letter of inquiry, I promise you, you will have everything that you need at your fingertips in order to write a good letter of inquiry. So I'd ask you to look at that over the next week and determine whether you have all the pieces, parts that you need for that letter of inquiry. Follow up with a phone call, and then funders are going to use your letter of inquiry to have a brief description of a program or a project. And sometimes, the review process starts with a letter of inquiry. So there may be a committee that's reviewing those LOIs and determining whether or not this is something that they want to ask you to apply to them for funding. Use your LOI to reel them in. This is your marketing. This is your, don't make it fluffy, don't get me wrong, but it needs to be exciting and interesting and show that you truly have a good knowledge base about what you're asking for. Funders recently reported that between 40 and 75% of the funding requests that they receive simply don't fit into their guidelines. At Buhl Regional Health Foundation, it's approximately 30% of what we receive doesn't even fit. And that's annoying to funders to have to look through proposals that don't meet funding guidelines, even LOIs. So if you don't fit, don't apply. A couple other little tips, using the word that as little as possible. And then I read a marketing article one time about the 12 most evocative words in the English language. And it's things like proven, safe, safety, health, love, discovery, new, easy. They're basic words, but they're words that if you have them in there, it kind of helps to put a little bit of meaning into what you're writing. What goes into the LOI? You use the acronym FIRST. F is facts and figures. Make sure the facts are pertinent and make sure that the total cost of the program is in there, plus what you're asking for them for. And then I is the importance of the issue. So from our homework, I guess, what I asked of you to look at last week, since we're not really doing homework now, what community does your program address and how important is that issue and how does your mission fit into that? And then the results that you envision and kind of pull in a little bit of curiosity. What would an improved community situation look like with their funding? And then the solutions that you're proposing, what are you going to do to bring about the change? And then show that you have a track record that is proven. What is your biggest strength? I think I asked in the previous class to be thinking about what is your organization's biggest strength, but also how do you know that that's your biggest strength? Your LOI should be very easy to skim. The first sentence of each paragraph should be the most important. Because a lot of times the funders are going to go down and they're going to read through the first sentence of each paragraph. And something that I learned early on was that the first sentence of one of your paragraphs should have the numbers in it. Here's what the program costs. Here's how much we are requesting from you. And that should be the first sentence of a budgeting type of paragraph. And then obviously showing the connection between you and the funder. And I sent out an LOI in our handouts last week. So look at that sample LOI. And then just a couple of pointers from that. If you have taken the time to reach out to your funder, make sure that you put in your LOI who you spoke with. at the funder. So for the sample LOI that I sent out, and if I didn't send it out, I'll send it out, begins with, I appreciate the time Ann Jonas took to communicate with us about our programs. That shows that you did your homework and you called ahead. And then right in that first paragraph, you want them to know what you're applying for. What is the program you're applying for? And then, like I said, now they put the amount of funding that they're requesting right in their first paragraph. What I learned over the years is to make sure that that's a first sentence of another paragraph. Make sure that you point out your 501c3 status in your LOI. This LOI includes that the mission of the Swim for Life program is to empower youth in the underserved communities. Empower is a great word, and it's used well there. Show that you're already an established program. For instance, this LOI, has been in this middle school for more than 10 years, or 450 youth have participated in it. Make sure that you have local stats, and then down further in their LOI, they actually have the drowning rate for African Americans between the age of 5 and 14 was more than 3 times that of Caucasians in 2012. That's a powerful statistic. And when you're looking for funding for a swim program, that's how you use statistics to paint a good picture. And you don't have to use some of those fluffy words. You're pointing out why that program's needed. Always make sure that you have some specific and measurable ways that you are going to evaluate your program. And we're going to talk about that in the next class. Time is it? Do we have time to go into the problem statement?
It's 11:38.
We'll do the problem statement and then I'll cut you guys loose. How's that? So the statement of need, or the problem statement, and it can be called several different things by funders, but I think we call ours the problem statement. I know a lot of funders that instead use statement of need. This is starting to really get into the meat of the grant. And there's a worksheet that I will send out, and it's worksheet 3.1, and it'll help you organize your information so that you can write a good statement of need, but it has to define the underlying problem that you intend to address should you get the funding from the funder. And it answers the question, why should the funder give money to my organization for this problem? So think of the grant maker, the reader of your grant, as someone who has to have the information at his or her fingertips to make an informed decision and persuade others to come to the conclusion that your program is going to solve the problem. And that is oftentimes what happens in larger foundations. In Buhl Regional Health Foundation, we have a committee, but in larger foundations, you're writing to usually a program officer. They're reviewing your LOI, and if they don't have the information they need to convince the board that your or your statement of need, that your grant needs to be funded right at their fingertips, then they have a really hard time convincing that board. So you want to make sure that you've taken the time to lay everything out for them. Keep in mind that the grant maker has a certain amount of money to spend. Remember, a lot of our foundations have that 5% spend rule, and that they have a lot of organizations that are asking for that money. So your needs statement has to be strong, to the point, and compelling. Paint a picture with facts and educate the funder about the community needs that you're seeking to change. So the problem, your problem, is the community need. Your action is, what do you intend to do about the need? So problem plus action equals solution. The solution is the positive results of the action. How are you positively going to affect the problem? So start out with the question, how do I prove there is a problem that deserves a grant? And the proving is not, oh, I think it's a need, or it's a perceived need. You have to prove it with data and statistics. The needs statement is going to answer for the funder, why do I care? So it's going to show the funder this problem is important, it's significant, and it's a need that is maybe even immediate or urgent. But this is your opportunity to demonstrate to them that you understand your community's issue, and that you as an organization are capable to address the need. And then put yourself in our position, in the grant maker's position. Instead of seeing that grants officer of the foundation as this nasty professor that assigned you a research paper and you're overworked already, look at us as someone who has to make an informed decision to persuade the board to come to our same conclusion. And when you start to think about your grant in that way, you start to write in a more convincing manner. And often the grant program manager is going to have to justify to that board why they're recommending funding. And like I said, making sure that that data and statistics are there at their fingertips is very important. And then put your problem into a context. And a lot of times I would start with a national context and then start to hone in on, okay, so at a national level, maybe you're writing for breast cancer, and at a national level, breast cancer incidence in women between these ages is X%. And then start to hone in on your community. So this is at a national level, but in Mercer County, our level is actually higher than the national level, or our level is actually higher than the state level. And here are some of the ways that we feel our program can address those statistics. There's also a temptation, and I did this, I've done all of this, to throw research and data into a grant proposal because you found it. It's like, oh, this is wonderful, this is data and this is research and I can put it in here. Don't use it if it doesn't make sense to what you're writing for. Only use pertinent statistics. And then, like I said, start looking for your community demographics. And you can find data all over the place. You can check the Census Bureau website, look at annual reports of organizations that are dealing with similar programs, survey your program participants. These are all ways to show that you've done your homework and that this is a true need. Give some teeth to your ask by using the right statistics, make sure that your statistics are as up to date as possible. Like we said, don't be using 10-year-old data. And a lot of times people try to pull stuff from Wikipedia or, different sites that maybe are not as reputable. Make sure that when you pull your data, that it's reputable data, that you're pulling it from a census site or, a site that, maybe a research institution. Consider how controversial your issue is and how controversial your approach might be. Keep in mind that as the controversy factor increases, funding opportunities decrease. So if you are writing a grant for an extremely controversial issue, make sure that the funder that you're applying to is aligned with you on that issue. Some funders thrive on funding aggressive and controversial work, but a lot of funders shy away from it. So just keep that in mind when you're writing your applications. And then make sure your program kind of makes people sit up and take notice. Distinguish yourself from others. Don't use gimmicks, but if your project uses some sort of unique hook, use it and make it compelling, and that will make the difference in your statement of need. What community need does your program address? So what is the problem? And this is where you answer the who, what, where, when, why. describe your target population, who is going to benefit, and then show that those in the target area are more needy. Not bleak, but that they're just more needy. And if you can show that it's, you know, like I said, the cancer rate is higher here than in other parts of the state or country, that's gold. That is literally gold. What are the views of your community? And is there anyone else in the community that's working on a similar problem? And keep in mind that the grant reviewers are usually in tune to who's working on what projects within your community. It is okay to have another organization working on a similar problem, but you've got to indicate to your funder that you know about that and that you've either been able to show that your project is attacking a different piece of that problem, or that you're working together with that organization to complement each other. So make sure that if you can, that you reach out to other organizations and start to build an alliance or a collaborative, because that really impresses a funder. Include charts or graphs if it helps your cause in your statement of need. For instance, the chart or the chart that we have on the page here. Wishbone is the housing project community name. Rosemont is the city. And then they included state statistics, which were lower than the county and the city. So this would be compelling for something like an after-school program that connects kids through art, like a Hope Camp, or for an after-school daycare program that stays open later for single parents who are trying to work. And maybe this program helps students with their homework and teaches students life skills such as cooking. You know, you think about what statistics you can show and how that works into what you're asking for. For example, I reviewed an application one time. It said all children need exposure to the art community, and they all have to have an opportunity to paint on weekends to keep them out of trouble. And that sentence absolutely did nothing for me. And so we at UPMC, like, we went back to the program and we said, you know, consider rewording that and using like maybe a family income level for the community. Use information that maybe is pulled from teachers or police officers or clergy related to, you know, what you're trying to prove, but this sentence doesn't help us. And so that organization did. They went back and they started to pull data, and they came to us with a really legitimate application that we were able to fund after. So oftentimes, if you are you know, new at this and you're just starting out and writing statements like this, reach back out to the funder, especially if you didn't get funded, and ask them, are there things that you could have done differently? Because we will be very honest with you. And we'll say, you know, we don't like that you said disadvantaged individuals. We want you to use this type of wording to explain, you know, the individuals that you're helping, or we would like you to support that with some statistics that show us why you're labeling them as disadvantaged individuals. So keep that in mind. Think about what would an improved community situation look like, and what would happen if the problem's not resolved. Will there be an increased cost to the community if you don't solve the problem? And then what could be accomplished to decrease that, to decrease that cost to the community? Sometimes in a funder's eyes, that's a really good way to look at things. You know, what is it going to look like when we do improve the situation? If we don't improve the situation, how bad is it going to get? And then why are you asking the funder to solve the problem or to help fill the gap of your funding? Why are you asking that specific funder? You know, and a lot of times we get, you know, grant requests where it's like, they only need $5,000 left out of a $280,000 project. Why are they coming to us for that $5,000? Why didn't they go to so-and-so, or why didn't they do it this way? don't go to a funder just because there's money. Go to the funder because, maybe it's the last piece you need and you've tried everywhere else. But funders don't want to be that, that sole funder. Don't shy away from using anecdotal information if it's used properly. Informal interviews, quotes from interviews can be very powerful. Quotes from focus groups. If you are using anecdotal statements, use it sincerely, and then cite the individual that you spoke to. If there's a needs assessment that had been done in your community that shows that some of the needs that you're asking for, it documents them, then definitely refer to that needs assessment. Look for plans. Look, for Chenango River Watchers, we actually participated in plans related to water quality in the city of Hermitage, county stormwater plans. Like we were, Superfund site plans. Our organization was in the forefront of anything that was happening related to water quality, and we made sure that our interests were mentioned in those plans so that when we were going after funders, we could cite specific spots within those plans and say, look, the county plan suggests that, and here is what we're doing related to that plan. So the more things that you can get your organization in front of and involved in, and get into the heads of some of the individuals that are making those decisions or writing those plans, do whatever you can, because it lends more credibility to your organization. Avoid circular reasoning, and this is when you present the absence of your solution as the problem and then offer your solution as the way to fix the problem. So an example of that, the problem is we have no pool in our community. Building a pool is going to solve the problem of having no pool in our community. Well, there are a lot of communities that don't have a pool, and it's not a problem. So if you're maybe wanting to build a pool because you have a high, and maybe you're near the Susquehanna River and you have a high incidence of children drowning, or you have a high incidence of boating accidents and people are falling over and drowning, and you would like to have an ability to teach people how to swim, well, that's a good justification for wanting to build a pool. But to build a pool because your community doesn't have one, that's that circular reasoning. Well, if we did it, we would have it. Well, that's obvious. Describe how you're going to handle obstacles that you can foresee. And this is important to grantors too. They want to see that you've done your homework, that you've looked out into the community, and this is your program, but this might be a problem. This might be an obstacle. This is going to be something that we're going to have to get over. We might need to collaborate with other organizations to get through this piece. Put it in your grant so that the funder can be like, wow, they really have done their homework and they really do know, what problems they're going to have, and they're starting to think about how they might address those problems. Don't seek a grant to solve a problem that's not a priority for your organization. And we talked about this last time too. Don't be so desperate for money that you're seeking money for things that aren't even directly related to your mission. Was this project a need before you discovered that there was money available for it? Ask that all the time. If the need's real, is the project going to meet the entire need or even a significant portion of it? So an example needs statement. And I think I could probably send this to you. I don't know whether I have it in the handouts or not, probably not. I'll send it to everyone. But something along the lines of the characteristic that distinguishes our state from others is, it's cultural diversity. It elevates our risk of teen pregnancies though. And because teen pregnancy occurs among all socioeconomic and ethnic groups, not all teens run the same likelihood of pregnancy. So consider the following risk factors for teen pregnancy, and then go through, okay, in New Mexico, 57% of students are likely to graduate from high school. New Mexico's families are largely unstable. 33% might be headed by a single parent, 9.3% headed by a grandparent. Start to take those statistics and have them in that need statement to help paint the need, for this, teen pregnancy program maybe. What is the poverty level? New Mexico might rank 47th among the United States for the population living in poverty. Statistics that build up your credibility. After you've got your problem statement written, you want to read it and ask yourself, is your problem statement focused on those who are going to be served by the program? And are they a focus of your organization? Does the problem statement directly connect the funder's mission statement to your organization's mission statement? Given your organization's size and resources, can you address the problem in a meaningful way? And is that demonstrated in your statement? And then is the problem statement adequately supported by solid, reputable data? Is it sweet and simple, persuasive, but not wordy? And that gives you a good problem statement. We're going to stop there and then, well, actually go to the next slide. Make sure that you review this slide. These are the websites where I would often go to pull statistics and data for my problem statements. And the census website, I think, was the one that I used the most. And you can find the fact sheet for the county that you're serving. American Fact Finder is also beneficial. And then keep in mind, uniform crime reporting has a lot of really good data out there related to neighborhood safety or county safety. So if you're writing some sort of a grant, maybe I know, like when we were looking at maybe putting a fishing pier in a park, one of the things that we said was, well, we're going to clean up that park, and right now the crime level in that area is this. And we got that information from our local police, but we also went on to like the Uniform Crime Reporting website to get county data, state data, and then what does your local data support? Is it higher or lower? So this is an important slide. Make sure that you go to that slide and look at some of those sites to pull your data from. So we'll stop there. We'll talk a little wee bit more next time about your problem statement, your statement of need, and then we're going to get into goals and objectives. What is the difference between a goal and an objective? Because that's important. A lot of people don't understand that. And then we'll talk a lot about the budget and how to pull your budget together. How your budget should tie to your mission, all of that good stuff. And then I don't know whether we'll finish up with the next class. And if we do, then we'll save that last class specific for individuals wanting to apply just to the Buhl Regional Health Foundation. And I know, there's probably questions in the chat.
There was just some information from Suzanne. She's going to send us the email about using that DUNS number.
Oh, good. Okay.
She said the federal government is going to transition away from using the.
Oh,
Yeah, they
good.
migrated away
Okay.
in, I think, March or April. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I haven't been
asked-
writing grants for 2 years, so maybe somebody else ought to be teaching this now. I didn't know about that.
I did ask Suzanne to pass along the email to us, so
Okay,
we can
great.
get that information out there.
Yeah, yep, perfect. All right, well, then we will see everybody next week, same time, same place. And we'll get through, the next several pieces of the grant application before we tie it all up. The last piece will be what to do if you don't get funded and what to do if you do get funded. So, all right. Anyone have, I see a lot of thank yous. I don't see.
If you have questions, you can send them over to me at jessica@buhlrhf.org, and we'll make sure we cover them throughout the next couple classes.
Yeah, yeah. I know at the last class, we were able to answer questions. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
do have one question. Does it often happen that you get back with someone that's applied and ask for more information or tell them this isn't what we wanted or?
We as funders, my feeling as a funder is that we're here to help our organizations. If it's an organization that's credible, that has excellent leadership and has a great program that is something that we want to support, and the application maybe wasn't written, the way we would like to see it. And we have done this several times. We will meet with that organization. We'll say, okay, you know what, your budget was laid out wrong. We want to see it this way. Go ahead and make these changes where, your statement of need didn't really have the data that we would like to see to support, what you feel the problem is. We would like you to rewrite it this way or to include these types of statistics and then come back to us with the next round of funding. I would say very rarely do we ever do that within a cycle. So if you have written the grant, submitted it to us, it's going directly into review. And there really isn't a lot of time for us to go back to the grantee and say, hey, we need some additional information here. If it's an extremely good collaborative program, we might have a little bit more time, to ask them to rewrite something. Here at the Buhl Regional Health Foundation, what we do is we receive the grant applications, we review them internally, and then we send them to our grant committee for review. When we're reviewing them internally, we're simply reviewing to make sure that the pieces are there. Every question has been answered. They uploaded their 501c3. The information that we've requested is there, it's concise, it's fitting within the format that we're asking. Then it goes to a committee, a board committee, and they're reviewing that application and asking questions. So they're saying, you know what, I don't see how this fits. And, they'll submit their questions to us as staff. And then we do a site visit with that organization. And we try and get as many of the answers to those questions as possible so that when we go into full committee review, the staff can provide the answers to some of the questions that the committee members have asked. But as far as going back to the grantee and saying, we'd like you to rewrite this, we don't do that within a grant cycle. If the questions aren't answered very well and the committee says, no, we're not going to fund this time, but had they done this, this, and this, then after, those decisions are made, we will go back to the organization if we feel it's a good, credible organization with a great program, and we'll say, hey, here's some suggestions on how to improve your grant application the next time around. Anything else? Okay. Oh, we forgot to stop the recording. Sorry, Joan. Your question is on the recording.